Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a episode with Brandon DaCruz. So we are doing our monthly series here, and we decided to, instead of doing Q&A, which we'll get back to those, we decided we wanted to dive into body recomp. Brandon had done multiple episodes recently with other people. I talk a lot about body recomp, so we wanted to bring us two together to discuss this and just see what interesting topics came up. We did our typical, hey, let's check in, see how we're doing. We each talked about our training, some things that we're doing there. So obviously you get a ton of insight there. We had a little bit of other talk before we dove into body recomp. And the body recomp side of things, we define body recomp, the various forms of body composition progress that can fall under recomp. So we talk about many different things there. Individuals, what categories of individuals can recomp. And then we talked about, those were the two that we got through. So the second half, which we will do next month, we are going to talk about why women may be more predisposed towards recomping, and then we're going to talk about actual practical applications and levers that we can pull for body recomp. So this one more so was a deep dive into the various forms and then what categories of individuals, and we dove into many different categories within that. So definitely make sure you go and check this out. I think there'll be a ton of great information in here, and then just make sure you tune in next month for part 2 with Brandon as we continue our monthly series and we do part 2 of body recomp deep dive. But before I dive into the episode, I have my coaching. So if you guys are interested in taking your training and nutrition to the next level, maybe you figure out, hey, I really want to get into this body recomp stuff. That's what I specialize in. And so if you're looking to build some muscle, lose some body fat, or maybe you're more performance focused, or maybe you need to work on your recovery and just feel better in your outside of the gym, that will maybe help you feel better in the gym, or take a deep dive into your nutrition, or you just want to take things to the next level, right? You just need a little bit more accountability and guidance and want to learn some more things in how your body responds. I'm always looking to add motivated people to my roster. And if you are interested in that, you can reach out to me on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_, or there's some links in the show notes to set up a call to discuss all of this in more detail. So hope you guys enjoy this episode with Brandon, and I will talk to you soon.
What's going on, guys? This is Brandon Cruz, host of the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. And today I got with me Jeff Hain, host of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Jeff and I are back for episode 5 of our monthly podcast collaboration, where each month we're going to answer your questions or we're going to dive into topics that will benefit both of our audience. This is going to be great whether you're a coach, you're a fitness enthusiast, you're one of our clients, or you're someone that's simply chasing a healthier, leaner, and more muscular physique. This series is all about bridging the gap between evidence and real-world application. So we'll be tackling everything from training and nutrition to recovery, lifestyle strategies, and anything else that helps you look, feel, and perform your best. Jeff, let's start off by doing a very quick recap on how things are going from a nutrition, training, and business perspective as usual. What's going on with you?
Yeah, man. Hey, we both just had our birthdays. They're like within a week of each other.
Can't forget.
Great time of year, man. We both celebrated that. I'll tell you that, dude, it's getting freaking hot here. And my gym is out in the garage, and dude, it is so freaking humid, man. It was just.
Do you have even a small AC unit?
Not right now.
For fans?
Because we moved in. So we moved into a new house a couple of years ago. And so when you move into a brand new house, it's nice because you don't have to redo anything, but you have to freaking get everything, right? We had to get all the blinds. The backyard needed a bunch of work. So unfortunately, that had to take precedence over getting my home gym set up the way I want it to. And so, dude, it gets so this time of year right now, like June to August, it's tough, man. Because, dude, when you're training in the heat, yeah, you can adapt to training in the heat and you can get better at training in the heat. But at the end of the day, it impacts your training performance, right? It's just not 100%. As good. It's just not going to be as good. Fatigue is right. It just fatigue a lot quicker. I'm sure the RPE of everything that I'm doing is much higher at the same output. So, you just have to kind of watch that. And taking a shower afterwards, man, it's like I have to focus on, I don't think I need to get in the sauna at this point. If anything, I might need to do some cold showers or something like that every once in a while to keep my body there. So it's freaking hot, dude. But I'll tell you that training's going well. Overall body's feeling good. I did get slashed the other day in hockey, and he just got me like in the right spot, dude. It was like right in the like funny bone. And like right after it happened, my arm just felt dead. And I was like worried that, I don't know if he just got me in the right spot, but it actually recovered super quick. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a bunch of fish oil, load up on creatine, stay hydrated, try and get some good sleep. And it bounced back pretty good. I actually ended up not missing any training from that. So super pumped about that. But outside of that, dude, just focusing on the same thing with training, just trying to continue to add muscle, push that. I will say, dude, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but I'm a hairy dude. My hair grows back super quick. And it's like, once I get to that point, I'm like, man, my physique is looking worse. And then I freaking shave and I'm like, okay, it's actually not that bad. It looks way better than what I thought. It's like, it makes such a huge difference there. So feeling good from a physique perspective in this phase, keeping weight around 164, 166, just kind of hanging out there, making sure performance is going good. And then last thing I want to say on my training is I just, again, to go back to the home gym, I would love to freaking get either like a chest support row machine, right? Something where I can do that because that's like the biggest thing that I'm missing. Some sort of leg machine, either like a hack squat or a pendulum squat, 45-degree hip extension. And then last on the list would be like a chest press machine, something like a Nautilus type 1 or something like that. I've always been thinking about what I'd want to add in. And those are like the four that I am missing the most from my training there. So just want to hit on that, man. But yeah, how's everything going with you?
Before we get into that, do you actually have this space in, I'm assuming it's in your garage. Is it a one car, two car
Three.
garage? Do you actually have three? Oh, three. All right. So do you have the room where you could actually situate those machines? Or even one option I love utilizing with clients, and it matters on the brand, it matters on the line, and also their budget. But I really, the hack squat slash leg press setups, because there's so much versatility with that. So that is something that I've always found advantageous. But do you have the space that you could, if you were to say, hey, listen, budget is not an issue, could you actually fit all four of those machine setups in your actual garage, Jim?
I probably could do 2 to 3 of them. And it would depend on what it is, right? I think if I did the leg press, chest support, back, and chest press, that'd be super tight. If I did the 45-degree in a leg, then I'd probably go chest, right? Or sorry, not chest support row machine. I could probably fit those in. It'd be tight, but I can make them work if I move some stuff around in the garage. So got a little bit extra space in there.
All right, at least you're not constrained from a space perspective, because I always find it very interesting. There's been a couple of times that I've helped clients. Now, this is not my wheelhouse, but helped clients build out home gyms, and it's an unlimited budget, but it is a constrained space. And that's where I've called upon a couple of the contacts I have from when I worked in the sports nutrition industry, because I have friends and former clients in terms of they had accounts with me for supplements that they've built multiple gyms, but then they've also built their own home gym. And that's really where I've been like, hey, I'm going to send you the square footage. What do you think we could fit? What lines would be best? And then also, what is the most versatile equipment? So a lot of times it has been like that hack squat and leg press combination. And then we've utilized, really what I like is that prime setup. And I believe you have that with the cable, right?
The prime with the cable. Yep.
Yeah, that's an amazing setup. I loved when Jeremiah had that, because we were able to, obviously I did Jeremiah's programming for 2 years. And he was someone that was funny though, because even if he didn't have the floor space, he would swap out machines. And there was a time that he kept sending me, and I almost felt like a bad influence, to be completely honest with you. He was sending me for my feedback, but a lot of times he was like, hey, what do you think about this chest supported row, or a lot of lat machines and a lot of chest machines? And I would say, yeah, if you have the space. And what would end up happening is he would buy it, he would put another one in storage, or he would drop it off at the gym that he actually had a membership to. And I believe, I'm almost certain, at one time he had a bunch of equipment, especially leg equipment, at a gym that he was basically letting them use, because he had so much other shit. It was so funny, but I always find it interesting. It's almost like a mental exercise in enhancing efficiency, but then also being creative when you have a limited floor space, potentially a limited budget, and then you're like, let's maximize the most we can get out of this. And I always find that prime machine, besides dumbbells and barbells and the basics, that prime setup to be super advantageous, from the amount of exercise that can be done, the resistance profiles, and just the sheer amount of like, not taking up a ton of room, but you get a ton of bang for your buck for it.
I get basically that. Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, I got a ton covered. It's just being in this for a while. We start to get, we need our, stale, but then also you get used to having things, or you're just like, I can't think of the freaking word right now that I want to say, but we're just kind of needy, I guess, when it comes to equipment, right? For most people, this is more than enough, but man, again, back and leg training are the two that I feel like are the ones that are the two toughest to do with what the setup I have, right? Because man, for my main quad movement, I still have to do heel elevated back squats. There's some days where I'm just like, oh, man, I just don't feel like doing, you know what I'm saying? I'd much rather have a leg press or a hack squat. I could just get in, right? And so there's that. And then, like I said, that chest support, I can do a dumbbell chest support row, but even those too, like sometimes it's just nice to be able to have that machine. So those are the two that I missed. And again, maybe even like a T-bar row, chest support T-bar row would be awesome there. What about you though? Do you use a Smith machine or anything like that in your training?
I do. So I utilize a Smith machine, especially right now. I'm still rehabbing my pec strain, but I utilize a low incline Smith machine as one of my main,
I like that
what I call a performance indicating movement. So I usually use that as my primary incline chest movement. I really like that. There are some other Smith machine variations that I will utilize on occasion, like a shoulder press. Have you ever done a JM press on a Smith machine?
That's exactly what I would love to, that exactly for that movement. Would love to use it on the Smith machine.
I really find it to be most advantageous for pressing and for some lower body movements to use a Smith machine. But I am very fortunate. And like you were kind of saying, I wouldn't say needy. I think that we're just particular. I've been training 20 something years. And so first of all, the same novelty of stimulus is not the same for me. And secondarily, there are certain movement patterns. And then also there are some compensatory things that I have from a structural perspective. So I'll give you the best example. I was in a pretty drastic car accident where I essentially completely split my abdominal cavity from the impact. And so there are certain machines that feel a lot better. So I'm going to give you a great example. You said the T-bar row. And if we were to utilize a straight T-bar setup with the chest support, I have so much pressure on my mid spine, my thoracic, and then also my SI joint when I do that, that it's disadvantageous for me. But if I'm to utilize a hammer strength horizontal, where you can utilize a unilateral positioning with that chest support, it's a great movement for me. I can also go in and use a neutral grip closer and make it more lat bias. I could stand almost like Cass used to do, or I can utilize essentially like a positioning where I'll put a block in front of me. I'll essentially do a T-bar, but it's actually me almost standing upright rather than bent over. I don't get that same protraction of my scapula, and I don't get that same pressure on my spine, my mid spine, my T spine. And so that's an advantageous setup. There's gyms I have here that have both. So I don't need to use the T-bar. But if I was limited, it would put me, I don't want to say in disadvantageous positions, but it would just dispose me towards aches and pains that I can work around because I have access. Now, this is the thing. I have currently 3 gym memberships, and I'll rotate through based on the day that I'm training. So there are certain days that I train at a Gold's gym. There are certain days that I train at a UFC gym, and it's just based on the movement selection, the availability. And then also for me, one thing that's very important for me based on my schedule being very tight and compact is what are the days that the gym is least packed, especially in the morning? Because I go so early that it shouldn't be packed, but there are certain days, especially UFC gym, because it's in a very booming complex that's right off the interstate. It's packed. It's 5, 6 a.m. and the whole place is lit up with people. And it's just slowing down my workout. So I'll go to Gold's instead. These are things that most people don't have to worry about. But when you're running a business, you have a ton of responsibilities, you have a long training history, you have injury, or not injury, but you have wear and tear on your joints, your ligaments, your tendons. It's advantageous to be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more specific, and a little bit more calculated with your exercise selection, the movements that you utilize, even the training environment you're in. I'll tell you personally, and not to hate on the UFC, but it's basically a bunch of posers in that gym that think they're big and they're walking with imaginary lat syndrome and stuff. It's just not a good energy. I don't like that. I have no ego when I go into this. I'm always a student and people come up to me and ask me questions, but I love to bounce things off them. Hey, this is why I'm doing this. What do you think about this? Why don't you try this? And I'm fine with that engagement, but some people, there's just an arrogance that I don't like being in that aura. And so I find that Gold Gym is a bunch of old school bodybuilders. And that's how I came up training. I have a Rich Gaspari shirt on right now. And he used to train at gyms that I was at. And he was second at Olympia, maybe 10 years prior to me getting into training. And so I really like that old school grind type of mentality, that atmosphere where there's respect there. It's just based off your work ethic. Everyone's quiet. They keep to themselves. There's no degree of ego or arrogance or narcissism. So I think that the movement selection, but also the environment is equally important. So like you have the blessing and the advantage that you're in your home environment. You know what I mean? So you are selective. If you ever wanted people to train with you, you could have friends from your nearby area or colleagues of yours come and train, but you also have the option to just put on your music, blast that shit, whether it be in your headphones or in your garage itself, and shut out the world. So I think that this is not necessary for everyone, but I do think these are some considerations when you're serious about this. You consider this a part of your career and something that's your biggest hobby, that it does pay off to pay more attention to detail.
And you can also work out with no shoes if you don't want to, or no shirt either, right? And it doesn't matter. But off your point on that too, man, and I'm sure you consider this, like I do love working out, but one thing that does help me stay super consistent with training too is I make it it's part of my job too, right? At the end of the day, again, anyone that is a coach, again, I think it is important to walk the walk, and I just think it's part of my job to stay in shape, right? If I'm gonna talk about these things and tell people like what to do and stuff. I know some people may not necessarily agree with that per se and be like, oh, it doesn't matter, but I do think it matters, and I think that again, that helps me stay consistent too, and really focus on, like you said, whether it's environment or whatever it is. I think that's important to be able to focus on that. And I'm sure you feel the same way about it. It's part of your job as well too. You probably do it anyways. That makes it even more likely that you're going to do it.
100%. I will say this quite frankly. There is not one thing that I ask any of my clients to do or would ever ask a client to do that I have not done myself or would not do. And I think that we need to be a walking representative of the principles we preach, the lifestyle that we advocate, the strategies, the methodologies, the principles that we pass on to others. And so I come from a little bit of a different, like old school mentality, to be honest with you. I got into online coaching in 2013. There was no one that had built a business that didn't train people in person or didn't have a good reputation. You could not build a business at that era. I didn't have Instagram. I literally built out of my backyard, out of a gym I was working at, and I was hybrid coaching people. And that's the only reason I built an online business. Nowadays, a lot of people get into the space because they see that it's got the potential to be lucrative, where you can work from home, and they're looking at all these advantages, but a lot of times they don't really live this lifestyle first and foremost. They're more like marketers, or they're more business savvy people. There's nothing wrong with that, but I do think that it's a little bit, first of all, it's dishonest, and it's lacking intellectual integrity when you're telling other people to do things like prioritize their health and their fitness and their training and put that above everything else, and make sure that you're limiting your alcohol consumption and you're prioritizing your blood work. And I can't tell you how many coaches I know and I've gotten on consultations with for business or educational consultations. They've never gotten labs done. They barely train. They don't look like they work out. And I'm not saying this from a harsh perspective. They don't take care of themselves, yet they want people to buy into these high ticket price coaching as though they're basically just presenting something, but they're not that person. And I think that is something that is a really big turnoff to me. So I really do try to be exactly who I say I am, who I present myself. You've met me in person. If it's about talking about intellectual conversations or going down the research deep dive or talking about what I do, I'm always going to show up and present exactly as I present myself online, because this is who I am. This business is an extension of who I am as a man, as a coach, as a partner, as a son, as everything. And so I think that it's really important that we do continue to walk the walk, no matter how far we get into this career, how successful we are. I don't think that component should ever stop, because if it does, you stop trialing things on yourself, you stop experimenting, you stop collecting data on your biggest experiment and your best, most well-controlled experiment, which is ourselves. We're at the end of one. And this is why every single year we have talked about this or spoken about this on previous podcasts. I do a fat loss phase, and I take myself through this cyclical phases of nutritional periodization, because every year I'm testing something different. I'm testing something new. I also know that I have a more controlled environment to be able to test, gauge, collect data, and then assess these things than most of my clients do. And now that doesn't mean that they have to run this exactly like I do, but if in order for me to feel confident about something that I'm going to utilize as part of a protocol or a strategy, I need to know if it works. And the best way I can do that is to shit test it myself.
Yep, absolutely, man. Yeah, like you said, you can control the variables as well too, and know what works and what doesn't. So yeah, no, man, I couldn't agree more. And again, I definitely think there's some coaches out there where they're trying to look at the next best marketing thing, and it's probably best thing to do is, like you said, get yourself in a little bit better shape and focus on your health and fitness too. I think that,
and go all in on your clients. Your best marketing is, I'll be honest with you, I built my business off referrals, and so there was no marketing behind this. It was doing good work, investing into myself from an education perspective, really enhancing my knowledge, my expertise, and my ability to help people. I poured all my time, energy, and effort. The first 5 or 6 years of my business, I'll be completely frank with you, I took not a single dollar. I went to seminars, I flew all over the country. I invested into mentorships and into courses and certifications and advanced education. There was not a single dollar that I was taking back. And I say that there's a caveat there. I had a full-time corporate career that was paying my bills, that was helping me finance everything else, from my house to my family to everything else. But it was an investment first focus, and it was results oriented, and it was results driven. And I just wanted to get people good progress. And that came from me doing it myself and then doing it with them. And marketing came on the back end. I've never spent a single dollar on marketing. I've never hired a marketing guru. I've worked with some business coaches on a not too deep of a level. Sometimes some of their tactics that they've thrown at me, I just don't think it's applicable for me, and to each his own. But at the same time, the best thing you could do is first apply these things to yourself. Secondarily, just work, whether it's 5 clients, 10 clients, 50 clients, go all in on the people that are truly invested in you. And that will do enough. Yes, showcase it on social media and show social proof, or talk about it. We do podcasts, and I'm constantly bringing up case studies of clientele that comes all the time in my head, because I work with these people in person and I truly care about them. But the marketing stuff, hey, that can definitely help you get you to the next level or to the next tier or bracket. But it's not going to make up for the fact if you don't have the knowledge, you don't apply it yourself, and you're actually not an expert at what you claim to be.
Yep, absolutely, man. Like you said, take care of your clients, right? Because if you get them results, that's going to speak for itself. So I couldn't agree more. You're always sharing client results. Jeremiah is, right? I'm sharing results. I just think that if you're not ever doing that, it's like, you got to show that you know that you actually apply this to actual people as well too. How's training going with you, dude?
Yes, actually, in comparison to the last time we were on this, so about a month ago, the right pec that has been trained feels a lot better. I would say, if I'm going to give you the most objective analysis, I would say 90% better. Now, that has been done through many things. I am utilizing therapeutic peptides. I am doing red light therapy. I've been doing a PT. I have been doing a lot of not blood flow restriction, but essentially what would essentially be like an occlusion style training, like very high reps, trying to force blood into that area to really get nutrient partitioning going. I'm utilizing collagen pre-training to get those extra amino acids into the serum, because a lot of times the reason there's disputes on the collagen research. You look at Keith Barr's stuff and it shows to be really advantageous. You look at everyone else's, it doesn't. But just from anecdotal perspective, I don't think it's doing any harm. So it's not taking over my protein intake. I'm not actually taking any protein away. I've just added on about 15 to 20 grams of collagen peptides plus vitamin C to help with collagen synthesis. I'm utilizing anti-inflammatory compounds like curcumin, boswellia, MSM, like some of these joint health supplements. And so in totality, man, I'm almost back. The only thing that I'm still having some issues with is going into the deep lengthen range of motion. Now, here's the thing. I had gotten into a big habit of getting very lengthened contractions, getting into a very lengthened position. That comes from, first, Dr. Scott was preaching that well before any of this lengthened research came out. He was having me do, back in the day, DC stretches, which comes from Dante Trudel, and it was an extreme stretch. You would literally take dumbbells and you would go into the bottom of what would be a dumbbell chest press, and you would just hold it for 60 to 90 seconds. I've been doing that kind of stuff for years. So I think that my active range of motion is usually deeper than most. Now, I can't get into those ranges at this point without feeling like I'm putting myself at a disadvantageous position, because I just do not have the strength and the contractile force in that bottom. It just feels weak. But if I'm going to do regular like range of motion, or what people would call now their active range, where it's essentially just getting close to the chest and pressing off, it feels like 90% better. So training is going well. I just 2 weeks ago, I transitioned to a fat loss phase. So it's kicking off. It's going productive so far, but we're very much in early days. I'm currently in the process of lining up some photo shoots. So this week, I've been reaching out to photographers and videographers to see when the timeline can be, because I'm actually going to reverse engineer everything. So it's based on when can I get a photographer? Because in Tennessee, it's not like New York. I used to be able to call photographers that I worked with in New York and New Jersey and book and say, hey, listen, I'm going to be ready this date. I need a photo shoot for this weekend. Can we get a place booked out? That's not how it is out here. And so I'm basically working off their calendar, and then I will either, it's going to be like a dimmer dial. I'm either going to have to turn it up to get in shape quicker than I expect, or turn it down and just slow roll into that. But I'll be doing a like physique shoot, essentially like a gym shoot. And then I'm also going to do a lifestyle shoot with my partner, Jane. So far, so good, man. We're now basically into summer, and that's the busiest season for clients. So I have a lot of clients that I'm working with that are currently in the process of getting ready for photo shoots or weddings or summer travel, especially like overseas, like going to Europe. And then I also have a couple competitors getting ready for contests. So it's going to be a busy season, but I'm really looking forward to it. I really live for seasons where everyone on my team is looking to level up, and I'm able to lead them from the front. So I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be walking the walk and right in the trenches with them. And I'm looking forward to documenting the process for both myself and for them.
Glad. I know you're saying you weren't 100% sure if Jane was going to be able to do the photo shoot with you. So I'm glad you guys were able to get that situated and be able to do it.
Yeah, just a little synopsis, since we discussed this. Either you and I discussed this on air or maybe off air, but my partner Jane had come down with, she had an outbreak of shingles 11 weeks ago. And this was from a very high stress burden. She has a very successful business. She's building another business, and she had went back to school. There's this whole amalgamation of stressors in her life. And we started seeing some signs, and luckily we jumped on it right away. She got on medication, but she was having some nerve-related issues, which is a part of shingles. She was having it where the actual shingles outbreak, where you saw the rash, was actually on her leg, and she was having a lot of pain through that side. She also has a previous history of sciatica. So we were just very cautious. I put her into essentially a health phase for about 8 weeks. And this was like a pure health phase. I'm looking at lab markers all the time. She's eating up. Her training was pulled back the most that she's ever done, essentially, in her adult life. And really and luckily I'm in the gym with her. So if I saw her pushing too hard, I unfortunately have to be like overwatching things, because Jane was second in the country at national. She was one spot away from a pro card. She's a very well-developed and hard training individual. She's a coach herself. She loves living this lifestyle. And she also has me there. If I'm pushing it, she wants to push it. And that was something we really had to separate, the fact that I'm her partner and I'm in the gym with her, but I'm also her coach. So I really need to prioritize her health. So she's done an incredible job. About 2 weeks ago, I was able to transition her into more productive training, get back to more of a specialization cycle type training, where we focus particularly right now on her glutes, like her upper shelf, and then also on rear delt training. And luckily, she's in the kind of place where her food has been high. Now her training has been really low. So we're looking at vectors like she has the anabolism from the food perspective in terms of energy availability. her body fat's not high by any means, but it's higher than it's been before. And so now we're in this recomp phase. I'm doing what I call a pre-prep phase for her. So she's essentially going to recomp throughout this process. I would most likely see this going for another 6 weeks or so. So maybe 8 weeks of total recomp, right around what I would call her theoretical maintenance, or based on what I calculate her maintenance to be based off previous cycles. And then I'll dip her into a deficit. But luckily, her body composition stayed in a really good place despite being on higher food and lower training, because she's super dialed in. We really focus on stress management. We really focus on sleep. She was dialed in all nutrient quality. I'm making sure that every single micronutrient is calculated in chronometer to make sure she's feeling every single need. Everything else is backfilled with supplementation, and she's super dialed in. The girl does not miss. Yeah, I'm going to get her ready for a photo shoot. It's just the timelines might be different for her and I, but I will make sure that I stay in shape to be able to do a lifestyle shoot with her. And then also make sure that she's in shape, because she wants to do a separate shoot she's going to be launching a protein treat business, and she wants to get some content for that new website.
Awesome, man. Yeah, dude, it's crazy what you're mentioning there. She just had, I like to call it like high stress load, right? Just a ton of stuff going on. And a lot of people just don't realize that. And I'm not saying she didn't realize that, but people outside of that don't realize that all that stuff adds up. And you also are trying to make body comp changes. And man, the body just, who knows, there's a whole cascade of things that could happen. But eventually it was, I'm sure at that point it was just like, all right, overload it. And you had to head back off. And I feel like as a coach, you did a great job just figuring out, hey, what are the stressors we can take off, right? It's like, crazy training is a good stressor, but when there's a lot going into that bucket, it's like that can add to it. And so that's a lever that you're going to have to unfortunately pull there with that. So super interesting stuff when it comes to that. I freaking love thinking about those things and learning about those things, because I find it fascinating on how the body works with that. Well, man, good overview with everything. Glad you're feeling better, and looking forward to seeing where you're at in a month with this fat loss phase, and then obviously seeing the pics and seeing how diced you get for it.
It should be a good one, my friend. You know that I have a tendency to push myself, so we'll see how dialed in I can get in. I'm going to try to get shredded to the gills, my man.
Are you trying anything new this time or anything like that in this one?
There are some thoughts in my mind. I'm actually going to get on a consultation call with a good friend of mine that he will essentially be co-coaching me through this, just so I have a second pair of eyes. And the reason for that is because I trust him, and he's an Olympia level coach. And then secondarily, because of the fact that right now is a very high workload for me. And I'm very good at staying dialed in from a cognitive perspective, but I would be lying to you if I didn't say that when I get to very low levels of body fat that I don't see cognition dipping. The other thing is, some of my neurodiverse traits, I have ADHD. I am quite severe when I was a kid, but I've been able to manage it through lifestyle intervention. But right now, I'm actually looking at potentially getting medicated for ADHD, just because I notice that there are certain things that are not deficits to other people. They wouldn't really notice because I have compensatory behaviors to make up for them. But I think that I could be more productive, and it would actually, I do not want to get on medication personally, but I do know that I can make a bigger impact if I get medicated. So I'm going in different interventional strategies, but the medication will not come immediately. But secondarily, I'm going to have a co-coach there, and we're going to do a collaborative process so that I have someone that could take over the reins if I'm buried with work and I just don't want to worry about my process. And so I think that's very advantageous. And I say this all the time, and I've coached well over 100 other coaches. I brought our good friend Jeremiah through many phases. I got him ready for a photo shoot and for his wedding and for everything else. And I've coached many people that we've been friends with and even have been on our podcast. Coaches need coaches. And so I have someone in my corner that I can bounce photos off of, or even just strategies that I'm thinking. I'm not concrete about what new things I'm going to be trying or utilizing. There are some different refeeding strategies I would like to try that I have not tried in many years. And I was looking over data files. I used to do very heavy backloads in terms of carbohydrate refeeds and stuff. And I think sometimes I've gotten away from some of those things because the literature does not reinforce them. But I also think that none of the literature is in someone that's getting to 5 to 6% body fat. None of the literature is on someone with 20 years of training experience. None of the literature is on someone that competed 15 times and did 100 plus photo shoots. And I think sometimes one thing about me is I try not to get stuck in a box. So there are many, I'm very fortunate that I have people in my circle that are both evidence-based. Someone I interact with quite frequently, all the time at this point, is Eric Helms. I bounce a lot of things off of him. Lyle McDonald's another person that I have great conversations about the nuances of science and evidence-based approaches. But then I also have people that kind of, they bridge the gap. So Dr. Scott is both a research scientist. He's an exercise physiologist that had his degree before basically anyone in the space did. In the 90s, he already had a PhD, but then also he's a bro that has gotten people to Olympia and literally has won multiple Mr. Olympias. So I have people in my corner. So there's been times that I've just gotten on a consultation call with Scott and said, hey, listen, I want to try something different. This is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And we just go back and forth. I record the call. I get a transcript from it, and I take what's useful and then discard what's useless. And that keeps my mind open-minded. So I'm not concrete in what I will be doing just because it's so early. I know it works to get me in shape, but I think there's going to be different refeeding strategies, different carbing up strategies, and then definitely different peaking strategies than I've utilized in the past. And I really am very much erring towards the peaking strategies because I have a lot of people that are either doing contests or they're going to be doing photo shoot preps. And I want to see how the manipulation of different variables from a carbohydrate, a timing perspective, a glycogen resynthesis perspective, and then also electrolytes and water balance perspective impact my physique. And then I can see if it applies to them.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. You're not necessarily, I just didn't know if you had anything specific that you wanted to try, but it's potentially some peaking strategies there and just going to play it by ear, I guess, and see, right? And see how things are going. Cool, man.
Yeah, it can't be until you get very lean that you even start utilizing and even do a mock peak. So that's why I'm not too concerned. I have ideas in my head, but it's going to matter. What does my physique look like? How lean am I? What are the actual physiological ramifications of getting that lean? What's my biofeedback look like? Am I lethargic? Am I flat as a board? So it's going to be both parameters from a biofeedback perspective. I'm going to be looking at objective markers like my health markers, and then also my autonomic nervous system markers, my HRV, my resting heart rate, my blood pressure. And then on the third or tertiary, it's going to be like, what does the physique look like? Am I super flat or am I staying full? Last year, I didn't get super flat because I ran that high energy flux phase, which we discussed on your podcast last year, and my calories were much higher. So I didn't get super flat and food was high, but I also had I don't want to say the burden, but I had two hours at a minimum per day of cardio, it was just very time consuming and it was exhausting, to be honest with you. So every year I try something different, but right now what I'm leaning towards, I need to get leaner to even trial it, to see if it works, and then to continue to reapply it to myself.
It's like they always say, you don't need to worry about peak week strategies and stuff if you're not lean enough, right? It doesn't really matter. You got to get lean enough. Focus on the big rocks and then you can focus on those smaller things that can make a difference once you get to that point, though.
Absolutely.
Cool, man. You got anything else you want to add, or you want to hop into the topic?
Yeah, let's jump into it. Just to give the audience a little bit of a background, I had done a poll about a few weeks ago, and basically the question was, what do you guys want from us? Would you rather us do a deep dive podcast, or would you like the Q&As? And it's usually split between the two, but it was really predominant towards a deep dive podcast on body recomposition. So that's what we're going to be covering today. And first, I want to start off essentially set up the foundation by just defining body recomp and then going through a few forms of body recomp that will all fall under what we will be discussing today. Because I think that a lot of times when people hear the term body recomposition, they immediately think of one specific outcome. And it is the one that's most common and it's the one that's most popular. And that's simultaneously gaining muscle and losing fat. And that's part of it. That is a really good outcome to shoot for, but it's only one of three forms that body recomp can take. So really, when I speak about body recomposition, what I'm referring to and what we're going to be discussing is about improving your muscle to fat ratio. So we're talking about increasing lean mass relative to the amount of fat mass on your frame. And one big distinction that's very important to make is it's not necessarily about what your scale is doing. And that distinction matters because the scale often doesn't reflect what's actually happening during a recomp phase. And that's something that I see a lot of people get confused about, even clients that I work with. Sometimes they're judging their progress by the scale. And I want you guys to disentangle body weight and body composition changes throughout the course of this podcast because they're not one and the same. And when we go through some of the categories of people that can recomp, or some of the physiology of recomp, or some of the parameters or the factors that influence recomp, you're going to see that it's not linear. It's not, hey, when you're losing fat in a recomp, you're automatically losing scale weight. That doesn't always comport. But during recomp, really what we can see is your weight can stay relatively stable, which is often one of the most common situations that we see, or it can move slightly in either direction. So it can go up a little bit if you're mostly gaining lean mass, or it can go down if you're more on that fat loss focus type of recomp. But we can't judge your progress by the scale, essentially. So recomp can show up in three different ways. And this is how I look at it, Jeff. After I go through these three forms of recomp, I would love to get your thoughts on it because this is what I see in practice. So the first form of recomp is what I call fat loss focused recomp. And this is where someone is exclusively losing body fat while maintaining all their metabolically active lean mass. So in this form, your body weight is technically going down, but it's not going down as quickly as you would if you were doing an aggressive dieting approach. A lot of times when people come to me and I'm taking them through this fat loss focused recomp, what they report to me is, hey, I'm not losing scale weight quickly. And the reason for that is they're comparing it to what they've done previously. And what they've done previously is an aggressive deficit approach, which hasn't prioritized resistance training in a periodized manner. They're not getting adequate protein intake. They're not sleeping sufficiently. They're not managing their stress. So they're seeing more total weight loss, but a large percentage of that is coming from lean mass. And if you actually look at the energetic content of lean mass, it has around 1,800 calories per kilogram. So we're talking right in the area of 825 calories per pound. Now, if you look at the actual energy content of a kilogram of fat mass, it has 9,400 calories. So say you have a 3,500 calorie deficit. I'm not going to do math off the top of my head on this podcast, but if you're losing, say, half of that from lean mass, you would lose 2 kilograms just from that. And then you would lose, say, 2 kilograms, which would be that 1,800 calories, but you still have 1,700 calories you're losing from fat. So you're essentially losing half a pound of fat and 2 kilograms of lean mass, or 1 kilogram of lean mass, rather, 2 pounds of lean mass. So you would lose 2.5 pounds for that same 3,500 calorie deficit. But that's because you're solely focusing on strategies and methodologies that are going to manipulate your scale weight rather than actually focusing on losing exclusively fat mass and maintaining all your lean mass, which is actually going to cause you to lose scale weight slower. So what's happening during this fat loss focused recomp is that your physique is tightening up, your body fat percentage is dropping, but your lean mass is being protected. And that's actually what I personally, shoot for with all my clients during well-executed fat loss phases. I want them to keep every single ounce of muscle tissue we can that we built prior to that phase in and of itself. Now, the second form of recomp is building focus recomp. And this occurs during mostly like a lean building phase. It could also happen during, I utilize building focus recomps where their primary objective is to gain lean mass, but they really want to keep fat gain minimal or basically non-existent. So in this form, your scale weight is going to go up, but it's going to be very slow. It's going to be a very slow process. It's almost going to really replicate. It's going to look like you're actually just maintaining essentially, but nearly all the weight gain that you do accumulate is coming from lean tissue. But because your total fat mass stays the same or barely moves, your body fat percentage is actually going down despite technically weighing more. So I'll give you guys an example of this. This is often the conversation I have with a lot of women that they want to go into a muscle growth focused phase, but they want as little of a surplus as possible, or they literally want no body fat gain. And really what I try to get across to them is this is a type of phasic structure that we can utilize where your scale weight is going to go up, but it's going to be exclusively or mostly from lean mass. And so it's actually going to either maintain or reduce your body fat. So the example here is, say that we have someone that starts a phase at 150 pounds and 20% body fat. That means you're carrying 30 pounds of fat mass and 120 pounds of lean mass. If over the course of a long period of time, you're in a phase and you're dialed in, you gain 10 pounds of muscle mass, while your fat mass stays at 30 pounds, you now weigh 160 pounds, but you're actually sitting at roughly 18.5% body fat. So you went from 20% to 18.5%. And it's not because you were focusing on fat loss, it's because you gained exclusively lean mass. So you technically weigh more, but you're also leaner. So that is another form of recomp. Now, the third form of recomp is the one that most people think of when they hear this term, and that is the simultaneous loss of fat mass and gain of lean mass. So your body is actively losing fat and building muscle at the same time. And because both of those processes are happening concurrently, your scale weight might barely move, it might drop slowly, or it might even go up because it's based on what is the change in energetic status of these tissues. Is lean mass going up at a more precipitous rate than fat mass is being lost, or is it the vice versa? And it's really important to realize that the scale is not going to indicate the rate of progress, especially in this type of phase, because you could lose 5 pounds of fat and gain 5 pounds of muscle, and your scale is not going to budge at all. But your composition is going to look totally different. You're going to look leaner, you're going to look more muscular, and your body fat percentage is going to have dropped. So this is the form that requires the most precision to execute because you're trying to drive two different adaptations at once. Fat loss, which is primarily an energy dependent process based on energy balance status, and then muscle gain, which is primarily a training stimulus and protein signaling dependent process. So when I think about recomp, I'm thinking about all three of these. And a lot of times when we talk about the factors or even the categories of people that can recomp, they can fall in any one of these three. So I don't like the limited perspective. Someone's in the conventional fitness field. We think about things in a very black and white or dichotomous manner. A recomp is only this. I don't see it as such. So Jeff, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspective on recomp and as falling under the category of recomposition.
Yeah, you hit on the three main ones, but what I want to do is I want to go over within that simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain. There's some intricacies I think will be interesting for us to go over. The fourth one I'm going to add is essentially though, just over time, you're changing your body composition, right? Maybe if you zoom out over 3 years, your weight's around the same, but you have more fat mass, or sorry, hopefully not, that would be a decomp, but less fat mass and more muscle mass, right? But maybe within those few years, your body weight slightly changed a little bit, right? Like to me, that's the other one that you could potentially add into this, right? Because you're still, if you go back to what you said, you're have less fat mass, but you have more lean body mass, right? So again, that's like more kind of long term. What I want to go over, because you hit on all the main ones, is When we go back to simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain, I also think the other mistake that I see here that a lot of people have with this is they think it's this like sort of switch where you're just like max building muscle, max losing body fat. And it's like there's everything in between, right? So I think it's more of a dial, and it depends on where you kind of fall at within that, right? What is the size of your deficit? Because the smaller the deficit is, that's going to increase your ability to add some muscle, right? If it's more moderate, your muscle building potential is probably going to go down a little bit, but you're also probably losing a little bit more body fat, right? And then if you go to a larger deficit, it's like some people still have the ability to, now you're obviously moving this towards, you're going to lose more fat mass, but because of that, you're now lowering the muscle growth potential, right? So I think there's everything in between. I think too many people get so caught up in like, it's this is the amount of fat you're going to lose, this is the amount of muscle you're going to gain. But what you do within those kind of deficits and where you're at, and again, your inputs are super important. I think your what I call muscle growth potential is important within all these too, because that's going to dictate that. I think that's where maybe some nuance gets lost in the simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain, is really looking at it more as a dial, and where do you move that dial? I'm sure is going to depend on the person, what they can stick to, what their current body composition is. But I think it's important to go over that there's more things within that simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain in terms of what that looks like specifically.
100%. I think that I love how you conceptualize that as a dial. I see it very similarly. A lot of times when I'm framing this, I used to do a body recomposition like masterclass within this private one-on-one coaching mentorship, and I often used to utilize like it was a slide which was a continuum. And I would show like different, and it would actually have a graph of like people, and it would be based off their body fat percentage, their training advancement, and then also like how dialed in they are. And then not only advancement from the years in the gym, but their actual like how dialed in they've been from a training perspective, because I really do think that there's a really big distinction between training age and training advancement. So how many years you've been in the gym versus how actually advanced you are as compared to your genetic ceiling. But within that, I see this as a continuum. So a lot of times people want, like you alluded to, they almost see this as this should be like a 1-to-1 ratio of fat loss to muscle gain. And it is easy to conceptualize it or to frame it as such. So you're going to gain 1 pound of muscle and lose 1 pound of body fat. But really, you have to look at the vectors in which the goal that someone has. Are they more fat loss focused? So we're going to turn up the dial essentially to more that fat loss focused recomp, or they're more muscle gain focused. And then also there's other physiological factors that may predispose that person towards being more in a more advantageous position during this whole course of the recomp to gain muscle at certain times and also to lose fat. I also think that, and this is something I've conceptualized in my mind, and it's hard to disentangle to people. And so I'm going to do my best to describe this, but this is something I see in practice. I think that sometimes the conventional recomp, we talk about it as simultaneous, but I actually see it as phasic. And so I'll give you the instance that I see most, and maybe this is based off how I set things up. A lot of times when I enter, I take someone into a recomp phase. I don't start them in deficit. I start them at maintenance. And really during that period, I want to dial in every single variable and vector we can. So their training, their proximity to failure, their progressive overload, their tracking in terms of training. Then we're going down the nutrition. I'm trying to get their protein intake dialed in, their distribution, their meal timing, their intra-work or their peri-workout fueling strategies, then their recovery, their sleep, their stress management. So I had this whole amalgamation of all these optimal variables essentially. And during at least the first 6 to 8 weeks, but generally I go up to even sometimes 12 weeks, I keep that person at maintenance. And essentially what I'm doing is 2 things. I'm setting up the muscle, what I call muscle building momentum essentially. But I do that actually for 2 different reasons. There's mechanistic and there's physiological reasons. So when I think about the physiology of muscle growth, what we have to realize is there's 2 time courses of adaptations. In the beginning of a training cycle, you have neurological adaptations. They're essentially just neural adaptations, neural advancements. So you're getting more technically proficient. You're learning the movement patterns. You're seeing performance increases, but it's mostly due to neurons firing and more from the CNS. Then once we get past, some research shows 3 to 5 weeks, some shows up to 6 weeks, we start getting into what are called morphological adaptations. So that's actually the protein structures. We're adding sarcomeres in series, or we can look at different contractile protein elements being added. So essentially all we're talking about is muscle growth, the actual constructive process internally, that cellular process. After that point, and we even see research from Damas and colleagues, that even in people that were trained, it took 3 weeks just to ameliorate or to get back to baseline the muscle damage effect of a new training program. So I think about the first, say, 4 to 6 weeks of a recomp is really we're just putting in structural components. And then from there, we're actually in the muscle building momentum percentage of it. But here's my thing. I think that oftentimes what I see in my own recomps is I'm helping them build muscle. We're setting the foundation for muscle growth. We're kicking off the muscle building momentum. And I think about it from the perspective of this. Muscle growth is far slower than fat loss is. So I look at it as a time course of adaptation perspective. Let me spend the majority of that recomp phase focusing on the slower adaptation. which I'm really going to need to get momentum for. And then I can almost dial in the deficit later and I could tiptoe them into a deficit because fat loss is going to be a far quicker adaptation to get. So I almost focus on muscle growth first and then fat loss. But if the phase is 16 to 24 weeks, essentially at the end of it, when you look at transformation, it looks like it was technically simultaneous. It was the exact same time, but maybe really they gained 4 to 6 pounds of lean mass during the first 12 weeks. And then we lost 3 to 4 pounds of fat mass during the end. But when we look at it from a fully phasic structure, we do a comparison between week 1 and week 16, all that matters is they recomped. And sometimes I have to explain to clients because they enter a recomp phase with me and they're like, why aren't you taking my calories down? Why are we at maintenance? Or why is my body weight staying the same? It's like, hey, we're literally putting in the structural changes. I'm dialing in every single thing and stacking every card in your favor to drive the muscle growth adaptation. I want your training as progressive as possible. And I need you to be patient. It just is that this was actually a very well-known coach that I'm coaching currently. And for the first 12 weeks, I had her at maintenance and she kept asking me, and I was explaining this physiological rationale essentially to her. And it wasn't until, so the first 4 to 6 weeks, she kept asking, hey, are you going to make any changes? And I'm like, listen, I'm looking at your training feedback. I'm seeing your body composition. You are making progress. It's just slower because you're advanced. And so it's not going to be drastic, but I promise you, by the end of this percentage or this portion of the phase, you're going to see a drastic difference. By like week 10 to 12, when we looked at a comparative analysis of her week 1 training to her week 12 training, there was drastic increases. And then I tiptoed her into a deficit in those last 4 weeks. Right now we're in at week 3 of 4, which will be the deficit phase of that. But she's going to be technically a little bit lower in body weight. She's technically right now right at her baseline weight. So her weight went up just a little bit, maybe about 1.5 pounds over 12 weeks. And then right now she's back to her baseline weight that we started at. Her body composition way better. And I believe that by the end of this phase, she'll end 1, maybe 2 pounds lighter than we started with a completely different structure, a completely different physique. So we got that simultaneous muscle gain and fat loss, but it wasn't driven in the same manner that she had expected when she came to me for recomp.
Yeah, it sounds like she was a little bit more advanced. And so for her, it's her ability probably to be able to maximize both isn't as great. So you had to pick one or the other there and then go back. But when you zoom out to the 16, 24 weeks, she technically recomped during that period of time because in the way you set it up, right? And like you said, too, for most people, there are obviously some people that are going to need to come in and probably be a little bit more fat loss recomp focused. But for the majority of people, I feel like they need to be a little bit more for looking at this on a continuum, they need to be a little bit more on the muscle building side of things. And like you said, that's just the slower aspect of it. So it just takes a little bit longer, I think, than some people think, right? Especially when you're building muscle, which obviously it's just a slow process to begin with. And then if you are, let's say you're trying to be in a small deficit while doing that, like you're just going to kind of slow that process down a little bit, but you do get both, right? I can see where that would just take a little bit longer on there. But I know that specific person, she wasn't in that deficit right away. You had her at maintenance though. But regardless, muscle building is still much slower than fat loss is. So
absolutely. All right. So next, what we should do is go through the categories of individuals that can recomp, because I think another issue with recomp, one, I love the conversation of recomp. I just think that it's been too simplified. And with a lot of things that become too simplified in this industry, they lose their nuance. So the first thing is there's only one definition of recomp. It's simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain. The secondary perspective is the conventional framing around recomp is that it's reserved for 2 specific groups. And we all know those groups. It's going to be newbies or beginners, and it's going to be people with excess body fat. And it is very true that those are the 2 populations that we're going to see it most commonly with. We're going to see the most dramatic recomp outcomes. But I think that perspective leaves out several other populations that can really recomp under the right conditions, with the right coaching, with the right guidance, and with the right application of the principles that we'll discuss later. So Jeff, I'm going to kick it off to you first. I just want you to quickly go through why newbies are so likely to recomp. I'll take over from there with those with excess body fat, and then we can go into some of the more nuanced groups of individuals that can still recomp but are often overlooked.
yeah, I think one of the main reasons that a newbie is able to recomp, I alluded to this earlier, where I like to think of things as muscle growth potential, right? And you take somebody that's more advanced, because they have more muscle, their muscle growth potential is down at that point, right? Because they've built a lot of muscle. You need to really have things stacked in our favor to be able to make that process happen. Muscle's lower on the priority list for your body, right? So it's like you have to get a lot more things in line. Whereas you get someone that's a newbie, they have high muscle growth potential, which to me means that, yeah, you still obviously have to train, you still have to do things, but you don't necessarily have to have everything aligned as well for them to be able to build muscle, right? So what that means is they could be someone that from a calorie standpoint, you could have them in a deficit and they're going to still build a pretty good amount of muscle because their muscle growth potential is high because they just are not close to their ceiling from that, right? Also, again, their training quality, they haven't been training as much, right? Or if they're newbie, they haven't been training at all. So again, they have a massive potential there to be able to add muscle. Again, I'm sure this person probably hasn't been focused on protein. And so it's, again, that's going to be a major lever that we can pull from them. They probably, if you look at their body composition, they probably have a decent percentage of body fat despite their BMI maybe being in a normal range, right? So again, that's stored calories on their body to where, again, we can be a little bit more, we don't have to be as on top of, hey, being at maintenance or a small surplus to be able to build muscle. You really just need that training stimulus for those people. That to me is why that the newbie would have a higher likelihood of being able to recomp. Essentially, it just comes down to, you can really be at any end of the energy balance spectrum and they're likely going to build muscle as long as that training stimulus is there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that does pair well with the other category of individuals that are going to be most likely to recomp, which is something you hit on. It's those with excess adiposity or higher body fat percentage. And I really see that many people, regardless of their training status, can recomp when they have enough stored energy on their body. And this population has a major physiological advantage when it comes to recomp because they have a large amount of stored endogenous energy in the form of body fat. And that's going to be available to not only support fat loss, but also support the muscle building process. So we see that when someone has excess adiposity and they go into a calorie deficit, they actually don't have the same physiological ramifications. I know that years ago we had talked about the impacts of energy deficits on testosterone values. And there's actually a great meta-analysis that looks at this. And they actually find that those, in men specifically with excess adiposity, that lowering body fat and going into an energy deficit and an active energy deficit actually improves testosterone values, both from a total and a free testosterone. And that's due to the fact that aromatase, the enzyme that aromatizes testosterone into estradiol, is in fat tissue. It's mostly secreted from fat cells or adipocytes. And so when you lose body fat, you actually lower your aromatase enzyme and you also lower the conversion of testosterone to estradiol. So we actually see some positive implications on those with excess adiposity losing body fat from a hormonal perspective, but also from a muscle growth perspective, because when they have excess adiposity, when they go into a deficit, they're not seeing the same physiological and metabolic ramifications of being in an energy deficit. They're actually just able to pull fuel to draw to like essentially support muscle protein synthesis. And honestly, my favorite recomp study of all time is actually a study. It's a 2016 study out of Stu Phillips' lab. It's such a great demonstration of this. It's by Longland and colleagues. And essentially what they did was they took overweight men and they put them in a 40% calorie deficit. Now, if you were to put any other population into a calorie deficit that steep, you would most likely be lucky to maintain muscle. And we have other trials that look at that. However, what they did was, this is such a beautiful study design. They put a 40% deficit. They had them train 6 days a week. They were hitting around 1,200 steps per day. They had both resistance training and high intensity interval training. And then what they did was they did a comparison between a high protein and a low protein group. And the high protein group is the one that's a little bit more interesting. They were eating 2.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And the high protein group lost over 10 pounds of body fat and gained 2.5 pounds of lean mass in just 4 weeks. And that is a wild recomp. And here's the thing with this. We have many recomp studies, but this is the only study that I know to date that has done a 4-compartment analysis. So they broke down the body composition analysis into what each body comp assessment did best. So DEXA might have been for bone mass, and I think BIA was for like water content. They broke down these. So it's the most accurate in terms of actual methodology from a body composition perspective. So these guys really did lose 10 pounds of body fat, gain weight, well over 2 pounds of lean mass in a 40% energy deficit. But the thing is that these guys all started 20+% body fat. So they were in an advantageous position to do that. And so I think that's why we see the common vernacular or the common, I guess, discussion is, hey, it's reserved for beginners or it's reserved for those with excess body fat. I completely agree that those are the most common ones, but I do think that there's a few other categories that we can go into that are often overlooked. And the first one I want to go through is detrained individuals. And I want to take this from a different perspective. A lot of times when people think about detrained individuals, they're thinking about people that got injured, like athletes and things that have been out for a long period of time. It's been years. I don't see it as such. I see anyone detrained as someone that is not currently at their peak level of muscular development and has just had certain circumstances in their life that isn't allowing them to stack the deck in their favor. So I'll give you a great example. I see this quite commonly. I work with a lot of former competitive physique athletes or competitive athletes, whether it be collegiate athletes. I've worked with MMA fighters or former MMA fighters, former college football players. I currently work with a guy that was a very high level many years ago. He is 35, turning 36. But when he was in college, he was a very high level baseball player in the NCAA. And when he came to me, he had been essentially training on and off, but he had just had his first child and it was just outside of the pandemic. And so he had been training most of his adult life, but once he got into a career sector, it was less training than he did in college. So he was at his peak when he was 20 and playing collegiate sports. He was getting paid to go to college and play. And then he got into a slightly less trained state going into adulthood and into the grind of corporate America. And then he got into even a more detrained state. So technically he was in the gym 3 days a week. He was still going through the motions, but he wasn't training hard. He didn't have his peak level of musculature that he had 10 years prior. And he also had a bunch of other variables that were what I would say are bottlenecks in his physiology for actually for maintaining maximum muscle and lower body fat percentage. He had very high stress. He was sleeping about 4 hours a night. His nutrient status was honestly very poor. This was someone that was eating not terrible food, but was really overlooking micronutrients. I remember him specifically being zinc, vitamin D deficient, and then also having very low selenium and iodine, and it was impacting his thyroid status. Now, he was not a very lean individual, so I couldn't have said, oh, he has suboptimal thyroid status because he has low body fat. That wasn't the case. He also did not have hypothyroidism. It was that he did not have the minerals and the enzymes necessary for the conversion of T4 to metabolically active T3. And so once we repleted all these things, I got him into a dialed training program. We started 3 days a week, and then we eventually titrated him up. He now trains 5 days a week, but this is many years later. He underwent recomp. He had extra body fat as compared to when he was a college athlete. It wasn't that the guy had excess adiposity, but he had higher body fat percentage than he had been previously. He was less muscular. And then also his lifestyle had constrained his ability to actually maximize muscular development and maintaining a lower percentage of body fat. And I think that in his case, this is a great example of the unique advantage that muscle memory has when you return to training, because when someone has previously built a certain amount of muscle and then they lose it through detraining, and it doesn't have to be them completely out of the gym. It could just be a decrease in frequency or decrease in volume or decrease in intensity. Their muscle fibers are still going to retain that myonuclear domain. And essentially, muscle is the only multinucleated cells in the body. So essentially, when you train, you increase myonuclei. And so it's already there. You essentially have the foundation. It's almost like a house. You have the foundation built, but it's almost like some of the bricks have decayed away. Now, when you go back to training and you resume the high intensity training and the hard training and you increase your training volume, those myonuclei are capable of supporting a larger percentage of muscle than you had previously. But now it's almost like you have all these structural elements in place to regain that muscle tissue much quicker. So what we saw was, obviously I had conversations with him, but his ability to regain the muscle he had lost came much quicker than it took to build in the first place. So what he built in 4 years at university, it took him 6 to 8 months to rebuild when we were training together. And what I found in practice is that when I work with detrained individuals, they often regain muscle at a fraction of the time that it would take me to help someone new build that same amount of muscle tissue. And during that period, recomp is much more likely because they're in a state where they're not at their maximum muscular potential. So yes, will acknowledge that if someone's completely detrained, they take years out of the gym, or they get an injury, or they go through a car accident and they suffer atrophy, or one of the biggest cases of actual muscle atrophy is disuse atrophy. So when we see people in bed rest studies, they lose a precipitous amount of muscle mass very quickly, sometimes in the order of like multiple pounds per week. I think those are the most extreme cases. So when someone hears someone talk about detraining, they're like, I can't relate to that. No, that's an extreme case. But no, I think that if you're not at your maximum muscular potential right now and you have a little more body fat than you've previously held before, and you're not below your lower intervention point, you can definitely recomp.
No, I like that. I like the rethink of the detraining, right? Because somebody would be like, before we just had this conversation, I would think that I would put that person in the trained individual, right? Which I know that's a person that you want to go over. I'd be curious to hear what that kind of looks like. And I have some ideas, but I like the detrain one now that it's, hey, this person has been training, but like you said, life circumstances got in the way and they weren't able to train as hard as they wanted to. Maybe other things kind of fell to the wayside. Yeah, they were getting to the gym, but what did that training look like when they just their physique just kind of slowly got worse? And so you start to ramp things back up. You have a good coach like yourself come in and look at what's the missing link there. I'm sure, again, looking at blood work helps. This reminds me of my client Luke, who is also a coach himself and similar, dude's got great genetics for building muscle, right? But he just had twins and he kind of came to me at a time when he was training, but again, same thing, life's got in the way. He has three young, like I think it was three boys under two. You can just imagine how crazy that was, right? And from a training perspective, I think, and we'll talk about this in the programming, but I think if we're looking at Recomp specifically, I really do think a hypertrophy oriented program is going to put you way far ahead when it comes to this. And again, his training was not geared towards that. So we did focus on all the things like you kind of said there, right? Got nutrition back on track, dialed in sleep a little bit more, and got him on a good hypertrophy program. And this dude just freaking blew up super quick, right? And again, it was very similar to that situation where he just was slightly detrained, even though he was training, right? He just needed those variables to be dialed in. And again, when I look at body recomp, we can sit here and talk about what's the deficit you need to be at, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you got to focus on your inputs. And again, I think the inputs are just super important, no matter where your body fat percentage is, et cetera. You have to get those dialed in across the board there. So really like your kind of example of that detrained person. And I feel like a lot of people, before they get a coach, that's kind of where they end up getting to.
Wheels. Yeah, I think that we can even categorize that. I'll go into train individuals, but I'll make a secondary category of individuals that are not sufficiently trained. They are working out, they're not training. And so they're the person in the gym, they're committing time, energy, and effort, but it's not goal-directed intentional training. And so they're going through the motions, they're going through boot camp classes, they're doing things that are not specific for maximizing muscle growth. Their nutrition, they're eating healthy, but they're not actually, we discussed this on our last Q&A, they're making a lot of errors in terms, they're not tracking their actual intake. They're not prioritizing their protein intake. They're eating quote unquote healthy, but a lot of times it's in excess. So they're holding a higher percentage of body fat, and then they're also not training in a manner where the stimulus is directed towards the adaptation they're looking for. They say they want to gain muscle, but they're the same person that comes to us. And I get this quite commonly and quite frequently in consultations, especially with women, which we're going to discuss a little bit later today. But they will tell me, I want to look like I lift. I've been training for years. I don't look like I lift. And when I really disentangle this, I start peeling back the layers of the onion. It's yes, you have went to a gym. Yes, you have been working out. Yes, you have been committed. I'm not discounting that. And I'm not saying you're lazy or you're dumb or whatever it may be. I'm saying what you are doing is not working. And you've continued to do it over and over again, and you've never gotten a different result. And so I'm going to change the paradigm in which you're looking at things. I'm going to change the approach in which you're taking, and everything's going to be focused on very, very focused adaptations. It's going to be driving muscle growth from a hypertrophy training specific perspective, and driving fat loss from not only just an energy balance perspective, but from a nutrient quality perspective, making sure that you're having a micronutrient rich diet that's going to have all the enzymes, all the micronutrients, the coenzymes, the factors that are needed for optimizing your metabolism. Zinc for testosterone synthesis. You're going to have iodine, zinc, selenium for not only thyroid hormone production, but the conversion of T4 to T3, making sure that we have all these enzymatic processes firing on all cylinders. So we bridge every single gap. And that's a category of people that I see that if you were just to look at from an outside and you were just to talk to them based on their own expectations and their own evaluations that are subjective, but their own evaluations where they're at, they would tell you, oh, I can't recap. I don't fall into any of those categories, but they can. And this is why I really think that 90 to 95%, I will put my career on this, 90 to 95% of people that you see in most commercialized gyms, I'm not talking hardcore bodybuilding gyms, I'm talking your Planet Fitness, your Retro Fitness, your LA Fitnesses. They have the potential to recomp because a lot of times they either have only one variable dialed in. It could be their training, it could be their nutrition, it could be their cardio, but generally they don't have all those variables dialed in, and they also don't have them dialed in consistently long enough to actually induce that simultaneous process of body recomposition that takes multiple variables. It takes multiple physiological systems firing on all cylinders to really be able to generate or to be able to do that. So I think that's a category that we didn't plan to hit on, but I do think that's one that is quite common. It's overlooked, and it is something that it really takes the guidance, the insight, and the feedback from a coach to say, listen, you're completely capable of this. In your mind, you think you're too advanced, but you're not. There's many things that you've been doing wrong, and it's not your fault. You've been misinformed or miseducated and misled. However, first and foremost, the body follows the brain. So I need you to believe that this is possible, and then I'm going to show you the path to doing so.
Yeah, man. A couple things off that. Like, I totally agree on all that. And I think also with this sort of avatar, and let's be clear here too. I feel like you also see this, like, while you were speaking on women, and I'm sure you meant this too, but like I do feel like there's a big group of guys that are in a similar spot as well
Yeah.
too. Where and I think a lot of it comes down to, again, just like you said, like trying to eat super clean, whatever that means to that person, training super hard. But then I feel like this avatar too also just they do two things, and it probably stems from one thing. But again, I came back to that stress load concept that I talked earlier. They just have a high stress load, like their body's not in a good spot to adapt because they're just trying to do too many different things. They're trying to live too lean. They're trying to freaking push training, doing boot camps, right? Like they're just chasing fatigue in their training. They're eating clean. And again, when I hear that, I think somebody eating like super high protein, like super high fiber, you know what I'm saying? Like not enough carbs, et cetera, like that kind of person. And so like you just get their body in a better position to actually be able to adapt. And it's like, it completely changes, even though they've been working hard and doing the things, like it just puts them in a better spot to be able to recomp, right? Because their muscle growth potential is low because of all the things that they're doing, right? They think that they need to chase that fatigue and everything like that. It's a super interesting avatar, but I like that you brought up that, again, these people think that they can't recomp because they've been training for a while, but it's like your inputs need to be dialed in there.
I also think that also crosses over to trained individuals because we have a review on this, but we also have good literature that looks at trained populations and their ability to recomp. And this is another category where people up until like 2020, when that Bearcat review came out, I was seeing it in practice. But I'll tell you, if you were to talk to the normal evidence-based informed individual, they would tell you recomp doesn't happen for trained individuals. And I think that although that's been disproven, I think that's still the most contested population in the recomp conversation. And I think that many people, first of all, they think they're way more advanced than they are. And then secondarily, they're confusing their training age and their training advancement. And this is something I alluded to earlier, but training age is how long someone has actually been in the gym. Whereas training advancement to me is how close they are to their actual genetic ceiling. So I have a lot of people that come to me with multiple years of training experience, but the way in which they've approached this, even if they're following hypertrophy training programs, it's still not in a structured, progressive enough manner to actually optimize the process. So they're leaving little percentages on the table that start to stack up and add up that actually take away from the totality of their results. So we just discussed people that are doing HIIT classes and stuff like that. I think those people are more likely to recomp, but I do think that there's trained individuals who have been training for years. They follow a hypertrophy training program, but they've never tracked their lifts consistently week to week. They've never gotten into the gym with the mindset of progression, meaning each week I'm trying to progress in loads or reps. They've never truly trained close to failure to maximize their hypertrophy. They've never had someone look at their training videos. They've never gotten feedback. They've literally just looked at what people are doing in the gym, where they're going through the motions. They see absolutely no velocity loss, but they think they're training hard because they're consistent. And I'm not disputing about it, but they've never truly trained close enough to failure. They've never trained to failure. They don't even know what that means. And so they have not been really pushing every single vector, especially from a training perspective, to actually maximize that muscle growth side of the equation. And then often there's bottlenecks and there's some maybe downsides to their nutrition. So on both sides, they're getting hit with not getting optimized results. But I think that a lot of people, what I see when I'm doing consultations, a lot of people come to me and they know me for being like someone that takes intermediate to advanced. And sometimes I think that they think they're like upper tier intermediate, and they're really like barely scratching the surface of an intermediate. When I do an objective assessment, now mind you, I am biased from having worked with so many advanced individuals. I'm advanced myself, but I think that a lot of people have more untapped potential than they realize. And so when I first start working with them, I transition them from working out to actually training with intent. They have structure, they have progression in mind. And to be honest with you, a lot of times their body responds like a much less advanced trainee would. I'm not saying newbie hands, but I'm saying their rate of adaptation, like when I start seeing a client that I've switched to a different programming, I've dialed in their nutrition, gotten their sleep and their stress management, and every single week their training progression is advancing, like they're making progressions in load or reps, they're not advanced. Because if you are advanced, it's a very slow grind, man. You're really trying to squeeze every single ounce of water out of that towel, and you're stringing it to a point where it's a dried up sponge. And so really when it comes down to it, I think that there is so much potential for all of these groups to recomp. And I think that I'm going to get your feedback, but I think a good example, and we had discussed this a little bit earlier off air, I think the Vargas Molina study that just recently came out is a good example of dialing in the vectors, dialing in the details, but also taking trained individuals and actually seeing substantial recomp outcomes.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah, with that study, like you said, I think one thing I want to hit on real quick. Somebody may take what we just said there as a negative, but I would think of it as a positive of like,
Absolutely.
hey, you still got a
You
bunch
don't
of
want to
room.
be advanced.
Yeah, you still got a bunch of room to continue to progress, right? So I would take it from that standpoint. And I always say this too. I'm like, again, when we've been hitting on this, but everyone thinks that they're at that point. But I just really urge you to try not be biased and really see where you can improve if you're not happy with how things are going, right? Because there's probably just something that you're overlooking somewhere along the lines, right? I just think as we do something longer, we're just like, yep, no, I already do those things. I'm good. I can't, there's nothing I can do, but it's like you always have some levers that you can pull to get better. But yeah, no, this study, man, I think overall it's a huge win for body recomp, right? Like you said, advanced people were still able to lose body fat and build muscle. The one thing, and this is where I wanted to kind of ask you about was, and again, this could all be semantics on this. I was kind of seeing some things where it was like, hey, this kind of proves that you can lose fat at maintenance. And when I kind of dove into it a little bit more, I just kind of questioned that finding a little bit. And I want to get your thoughts on this because everything I saw was like, okay, yes, I think what the study does show is that you can lose fat at maintenance, at estimated maintenance calories, right? You can maintain your weight and you can lose body fat. But where I kind of just dove into it more and was like, okay, but this to me doesn't necessarily disprove that you need to be in a deficit to lose body fat. Because again, when you look at how they kind of did the study, it was estimated maintenance calories, and then they had them track. You and I both know that, again, I get it. You can't do doubly labeled water. You can't do a metabolic ward study for these people, right? I totally get that. And so you have to use the tools that you can have. But we both know that the accuracy of that could still be off as much as they like, no matter what, even people that are advanced could potentially be off a little bit. And so like my thought was, yeah, they may have maintained their weight, but I still feel like a lot of these people ended up drifting into a deficit to be able to lose body fat, right? What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that? Do you think that, am I missing something here potentially? Or
no, so I have a lot of deep thoughts, but I think that for the audience, let me give like a background on the study just so they get a better idea. I was supposed to review this actually on a podcast about a month ago, so I should have the details pretty well. So essentially what they did was this was a study by Vargas Molina, and actually a good friend of mine, Alan Aragon, is a published author on this. And essentially what they did was there was three groups, but essentially the groups that we really need to pay attention to there was two intervention groups. And they took individuals it was 30 individuals, and they were all resistance trained. And they ensured that they were advanced trainees essentially, and they randomized them into one of three groups. And now the first group was a maintenance calorie group. And so they were at estimated maintenance, and they were essentially on the same resistance training program. And all three groups are on the same resistance training program. Now, the two intervention groups, which are both diet plus exercise, were at 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And so we have a maintenance group, and then we have a small deficit group. And the small deficit group was in a 250 calorie deficit, which they said for the average of that population was a 10% deficit. So we're talking quite conservative. But in totality, there's a maintenance group with high protein, a deficit group with high protein, and then there was another group that was like a control group that they did the same training program, but absolutely no nutritional intervention. We really don't have to worry about that because that group didn't see any results, to be honest with you. And that just shows the power of nutrition, to be honest with you. But if we look at the intervention groups, essentially what they found was that both groups lost body fat and gained lean mass, but it was in a different matter of degrees. So the deficit group lost somewhere in the realm of 3 kilograms of fat, so a substantial amount of fat, and they gained around 1 kilogram of fat mass. Now, the maintenance group lost about half of that. I believe they lost like 1.4 or 1.5 kilograms of fat, and they gained close to a kilogram of lean mass. So what was very interesting was actually the deficit group, and this is not statistically significant, but they gained slightly more lean mass than the actual maintenance group. And so really when you look at it, both of these groups recomped. And what it showed was that the deficit group lost more fat because of the energy deficit. And that makes sense. They were in a larger, more substantial deficit, and they gained about the same amount of muscle. So if you look at it from one contextualization, you say you can gain muscle in a deficit. But then how they framed it was they said something to the effect that it challenged the energy balance model. And now I get why they say that, because you can look at the energy balance model as some people look at it as you have to be an energy surplus is required for muscle gain. So if we're just talking about that end of the spectrum, I would say it did disprove that because you gained lean mass in an energy deficit for the deficit group. But the maintenance group lost fat mass. So they were contextualizing it as at maintenance, you could lose body fat. But if you actually look at the energetic contents, and this is something funny that you brought up, I back calculated them. And I sent an email to Eric Helms about this. And I back calculated the energetic content based off the amount of lean mass and fat mass loss on the entire group. And what I found was that the deficit group was actually in a larger deficit than 250 calories, and the maintenance group was actually in a smaller deficit, but they were still in an energy deficit. If you look at the energetic changes in content, and how I was able to contextualize, even dig into this, was if you look at the Rafalo meta-regression and meta-analysis, or systematic review and meta-regression, they did it on protein intake. If you actually look at their methodology section, it wasn't, when they looked at resistance trained individuals in an energy deficit and the changes in lean mass and protein intake, it wasn't based on what the study said it was. So for instance, if a study said it was energy deficit versus maintenance group, they looked at the actual populations and the body composition change outcomes. So some studies will say this was done at maintenance, or they won't give you any nutritional information. But if you're losing fat and the energetic changes are outweighing the lean mass gain, that means you're in energy deficit from a net metabolizable energy perspective. So technically this study, I think how they framed it, they didn't want to get into the really large details, because then you have to go back to the 50s, which was the Wisnowski rule, which is the 3,500 calorie rule, which I've done a full podcast many years ago. It's not really applicable to actually changes in lean mass and fat mass. It's based on like fat tissue, which is generally 80 to 87% fat mass. And then you have to look at the water content, which is why it's 3,500 calories. And actually, if you do it mathematically, it's 3,600 calories. They round it down to 3,500. But if you actually look at the energetic content from Kevin Hall's analysis, he did a physics, essentially a mathematical modeling study. And if you look at the amount of calories it takes to gain or lose a kilogram of lean mass, I believe it's 1,815 calories. And if you look at the energetic content of a kilogram of fat mass, fat entirely, it's actually over 9,400 calories. And the reason for that is that if it's all triglyceride, it's all fat, technically has 9.4 calories per gram. So you do 1,000 grams of that 1 kilogram equals 9,400 plus calories. But if you look at tissue changes, they were both in an energy deficit. So I think that maybe they oversimplified the conclusion, but at the same time, it shows that this outcome, you can gain muscle and lose body fat in a little bit larger of a deficit than 250 calories, but you could also lose it at a smaller. And I don't remember the exact math. I could pull it up through an email chain that I have with Eric, but I believe it might have been 140 something calories versus 340 calories. But I'm going to bring it back because I really when I think about these concepts, I try to look at it through multivariate thinking, which means I try to pull multiple areas of literature. And if we go back to another meta regression that we have, there's a meta regression in 2022 by Murphy and colleagues, and they look at the energetic, it's all resistance trained individuals in energy deficits. And they look at it's like this plot, and they show what they're looking for is what is the size of energy deficit that cuts off or constrains lean mass gains. And on a population average, based off the studies they had, they found that over 500 calorie deficit per day, which is where the confidence interval or the confidence that you could gain lean mass went down substantially. So under that, so 500 calories and less, you had a chance of lean mass. They also did another secondary analysis that you have to really pull through the actual paper to see. They looked at maintenance conditions. So the control condition was at maintenance versus the energy restricted condition. And they found that those at maintenance gained more muscle in those same resistance training interventions than those in a deficit. So we see it's almost like a dose response. The closer you are to maintenance, the more likely you are to gain lean mass. And then below a 500 calorie deficit, you have a higher likelihood of gaining lean mass while losing fat simultaneously. So really when it comes down to it, this study, the reason when we spoke off air, I said we can randomly throw this into the podcast because it is validation for coaches like us that have been saying that recomp can happen in trained individuals. And we've been saying that for years. And I think that it can be done. But I think that one thing from this paper that I would even like to take more than what was the energy balance status is that if you look at the control group that did the same resistance training protocol, there's two differences between them. They did the same resistance training, but I don't believe they were supervised. So they probably weren't pushing to proximity to failure, and they didn't have a high protein diet or anything dialed in from a nutritional perspective. And so I think that really what this shows is that for advanced individuals, so trained individuals, for them to recomp, precision is a must. So you have to have your protein intake dialed in. You have to have your training dialed in. It has to be structured. It has to be progressive. You have to actually be paying attention to it and monitoring it and making sure that progressive volume is going up. Because in one of the sections of the paper, they spoke about how they were talking about volume had to increase across the course of the phase, and they didn't mean it by sets. They weren't escalating sets. They were still doing 21 sets. It was an upper body, lower body training program, and it was 3 sets per exercise, 7 exercises per upper body, per lower body. And so they were doing 21 sets per session, but what they saw was volume load was increasing because they were progressing either by rep increases or load increases. And so you have to have some type of progression. And another aspect of that, the deficit has to be conservative. They were both in a deficit, but they were both small deficits, and it still comports with all the other physiological data that we have on energy deficits and their ability to lose muscle but also gain lean mass. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And that's how when I did the episode on this, like that's how I framed it as, look, regardless, this is a win for body recomp. It doesn't matter. It's just, I'm getting into the nitty gritty here with it. Right. And it was a good training program. And like you said, the inputs are important, and especially protein too, right? I think protein is super important when we are trying to recomp as we get into a deficit. And again, the more advanced you are as well too, I think it's super important. But one last thing on this real quick too, because, when it comes to energy balance, it's so dynamic from person to person, as we've talked about multiple times, right? And so it's just like what could be a deficit may not be, for, you know what I'm saying? And then you get protein in the mix, thermic effective food comes in, and then you have meat. And so it's just hard to really get that situated there. So I'm glad to hear your thoughts on that. And it aligns with what I was thinking there, because I was like, am I missing something or what? But regardless, it's a win for body recomp, and that's ultimately what we care about.
All right, so we will wrap this up after one more topic. Would you want to cover? I'm going to let you pick. We can either cover enhanced trainees or we can go into the female physiology one. That would be a little bit longer though. So I'm going to let you choose, and I'll take the directive from there.
This is a tough one. I think we should do. Let's here. I'm just going to pause this real quick.
All right, so the fifth and final population that we want to touch on today is enhanced trainees. And that's going to mean individuals using performance enhancing drugs like exogenous testosterone or anabolic steroids. And I want to be upfront about this. I'd spoken to Jeff off air about this. We're covering this because it's in the physique space. It's something that we see quite commonly. It's something that's there, and we just want to discuss like the physiology that's going behind it. But I don't want this to be seen as a recommendation. The reason I think it's worth including in the conversation is that what we see in advanced and in enhanced athletes actually tells us something that's really important about the natural athlete's physiological ceiling, because enhanced athletes expose what happens when you remove some of the constraints natural lifters bump up against. And how I've tried to contextualize this to other individuals, whether it be coaches that I mentor, is stop looking at it as black and white, like PDs do this or PDs do that. Yes, they have. We can go into some of the physiological effects that they have. However, it's almost like you're able to get newbie gains again. Because if you actually look at the rate of adaptation of someone that becomes enhanced, it's almost similar to what they were like when they first started training. It's not to say you're going to regain all your newbie gains, but the rate of adaptation, especially with that first androgen exposure, is often at such a rapid rate as compared to what that same person could have gained in a natural state, that it mirrors what a much lesser advanced trainee. And we see this even with very high level natural individuals. I'm not going to name them particularly, but there's a few high level Olympia level competitors that went from being very high level naturals, and then they actually crossed over. And actually, a few people that I could name is Kai Green was of that case. I believe he turned pro naturally, and Kai Green's from New York, which he used to be. I went to seminars with Kai Green, great dude. He was a very high level natural competitor. Even in his teens, he won like the WNBF pro titles, and I believe he turned pro naturally. And then within the course of going to the dark side, as you would say, he gained enormous amount of tissue. He was already a very muscular individual. The same thing can be said about Ronnie Coleman. A lot of people have debates, or they have postulations that Ronnie Coleman did not turn pro naturally. But if you actually look at him, he went to, at the time it was called the Team Universe, and people used to compete naturally in the universe. And this is an NPC show that will be next month. I have a competitor competing in it, but it used to be drug tested. And so what you would do is you would compete, and if you won your class there, you would compete on the team again at the actual Mr. Universe, overseas generally. And those were drug tested shows. Now, if you look at Ronnie Coleman when he actually competed there, or when he got his pro card, he was in the 220s. When Ronnie Coleman was winning Olympias, he was 280 plus. If you think he was using drugs to get to 220, and then all of a sudden he just unlocked a different androgen and gained another 60 to 70 pounds, you don't understand pharmacology nor physiology. And so I think that we have to realize that this is just raising the ceiling. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that, because it's showing what a change in physiology or just an enhancement of it is actually doing from a muscle growth and a fat loss perspective. So I'll give you some of the benefits of enhancements or PDs. They're going to essentially, enhance athletes in general are going to have an elevated anabolic response as exogenous androgens. So that could be testosterone, DHT derivatives, 19-nor derivatives. They're going to increase muscle protein synthesis. They're going to improve nutrient partitioning. They reduce muscle protein breakdown, which is also going to be very advantageous for dieting, because they're essentially going to ameliorate both muscle loss, and then some of them work on receptors that are involved in cortisol. So they actually like ameliorate that cortisol response. Very interesting. Some orals do that, and then some more advanced anabolics do that as well. And then they raise the ceiling on how much muscle the body can build and retain. Now, there's other compounds that are not considered androgens, but they work through fat loss perspectives. If we look at clenbuterol, about an 80 microgram dose of clenbuterol, which is like what they used to use pharmaceutically, it can raise resting metabolic rate by about 20+%. But it also can stimulate, I'm forgetting the exact pathway, but it has to do, it's an mTOR phosphorylation pathway, and it increases it quite substantially. So technically it has anti-catabolic effects. So it's causing you to lose body fat, but it has anti-catabolic catabolism. And what's very interesting about that, if you think about fat loss, the lipolysis process is catabolic. It's breaking down substrates. It's technically taking a triglyceride, which is a stored fat molecule. It's breaking it. It's taking three free fatty acids and that glycerol backbone and breaking it apart. And then it's going through the serum. It's going through transportation into the mitochondria of the cell to be burned off for energy. That is the entire fat loss physiology process. But there are compounds that PEDs or that enhanced athletes use that are categorized under PEDs that enhance the lipolysis, the transport, the mobilization, and the oxidation pathway. But they also make sure that getting into that deficit, it's essentially creating an artificial deficit or an enhanced deficit, but it's also protecting from the muscle loss that would come along with that. So this is just showing you what can happen. And a lot of times when you look at people that get on PEDs, even if they were to keep their nutrition at baseline, a lot of times they essentially gain lean tissue and they lose body fat. We even see that in some of the Bayesian studies, which look at a dose escalation effect from testosterone. And so it really changed the equation when you're enhancing certain vectors from a pharmaceutical perspective. And another thing that this does is it changes the equation in what variables you can get away with. So I'll give you an example. There are many competitive bodybuilders that I've known, that I've interacted with, and I've followed their preps, or some of them I've even coached. And they can build muscle at very low levels of body fat. They can build muscle in situations and conditions physiologically and from a body comp perspective that most naturals would lose muscle. And they can even go through shorter fat loss phases. If you look historically, this is something I've talked with Eric Helms off air about a lot of times. If you look at the old school bodybuilding preps, a lot of times they were 8 to 12 weeks. And the reason for that was essentially the drug cycle length, but also they were able to utilize aggressive deficits and get into shape. Now, keep in mind, 70s and 80s, the conditioning standard was much lower. The bar was much lower than it is now. However, they were able to expedite the process of building muscle and losing body fat because of the exogenous androgens that they were using. Whereas if you look at the highest level natural pros, I've spoken at length about this with Eric. Off air, I've spoken to Alberto Nunez. Their preps are like 24 weeks or longer. And it's very long, extended periods of time. They're doing things in the most conservative deficit possible to retain lean mass. So I think that androgens just shift the balance, especially from a muscle protein balance perspective. They're keeping them in a net positive nitrogen balance perspective. And I can even say that I do think that even going on HRT, and I'm going to say this very clearly, it's not that HRT in and of itself is going to cause recomp. It's that if someone is clinically deficient to the point that they could use testosterone, estradiol, progesterone to replace something that has been downregulated naturally or due to a hormonal dysfunction or whatever it may be, I think getting back to that place of sufficiency could put them in a more advantageous position. It's not that the actual introduction of testosterone or even thyroid hormone, it could just be that it's actually shifting, or it's essentially releasing the bottlenecks you've had on your physiology that have kept you in a state where it was very hard to build muscle and burn body fat.
I was going to ask you about TRT, but like you said there, it's essentially if you are actually low, you're under the kind of levels we want you to be at, getting back into those normal ranges, you just are in a better spot. Again, I think of it as not going to have to go through menopause or anything like that, but an understanding is, hey, it can impact your motivation, your willpower, right? Your decision-making, things like that. And those things do start to add up over time and your ability to push training and stuff like that there. But again, the key, like you said, is getting back to those normal levels is the important thing. And then did you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, just in terms of the menopause, because that's a common conversation that I have. If you actually look at the literature on HRT for women, you look at estradiol replacement, we're not seeing very substantial or significant body composition effects. And I think that's over short time courses. If you actually look, even if you look at the testosterone in women studies, it doesn't show a massive body composition effect. Now, I think that those are confounded for multiple reasons. And I think that sometimes people are talking out of two sides of their own mouth when they discuss this topic, and they don't realize that we can meet in the middle. So I'm going to try to be that conduit for this conversation. And so there's some people in the HRT community that they are physicians or they're more the functional practice, and they're saying HRT is great for body composition. You get on that, it's going to have drastic results. And then there's other people in more of the evidence-based perspective, and several people like from Mass Research Review, they would tell you, hey, listen, the data does not comport that you're going to get body composition effects or benefits from the usage of replacement hormones. And I see both sides. I think what we need to come to the middle ground is that independently adding in something like testosterone, whether it be for men or for women, is not a panacea. It is not going to ameliorate all the issues that you had. If you had low testosterone because you had shit sleep and a poor diet and you were micronutrient deficient and you weren't training adequately and you have excess body fat, putting in testosterone in the mix, it actually may, I don't want to say do more harm than good. A lot of times, if we actually look at the testosterone trials and the data in men, most men will discontinue, and a very high percentage will discontinue within 1 year of utilizing HRT because it didn't solve their issues. And they're looking at it as they're using it as a band-aid, but thinking that it's going to be almost like the one ring that rules them all. Now, here's the issue with that. They didn't change anything else about their lifestyle. They put in an injection or they put in a scrotal transdermal application, and it didn't work for them because they didn't dial everything else in. Now, I'm looking at it from a different side of the equation as someone that has worked in practice for 16 years, has guided many people through the HRT process in terms of going over their labs, making sure that their symptomology is improving upon, and we're using it for symptom management. When I have a woman in perimenopause and she is suffering with hot flashes and with vasomotor symptoms, and she is having, and those are the ones that are most correlated with actual, because that's from fluctuations in estradiol. But as estradiol declines, we start seeing there's brain regions and there's regions in the brain that get dysregulated from a lack of estradiol, essentially. So that's what causes a change in temperature regulation, where you have hot flashes and you're constantly going through things that are not only really uncomfortable and unsettling, but they also disrupt your sleep. So now you have all these knockdown effects. In those certain cases, if you actually look at the MHT data and you look at the Menopause Society, they only really recommend it for the symptom management of those things, because there's other things that they cluster. Sleep decrements, which could be from low progesterone, but sleep can also be the number one reason for sleep loss in women over 50 years old is actually undiagnosed sleep apnea. But these are many things. They're not engaging in as much fitness. They're also gaining excess body fat. We're seeing all these knockdown effects. So this is where I see it. Body composition changes can be enhanced through the usage of HRT if everything else is dialed in, and then you add it in, or adding this in acts as the Kickstarter for everything else, almost like GLP-1s. Then you have better energy levels because you repleted these hormones. So now you're able to be more active, and you dial in your diet, and you're more motivated, and you go to the gym more consistently, and you focus on your sleep, and you focus on your stress, and you stay hydrated. Then you're going to see these exponential body composition effects because you were deficient, and you were also not only deficient from a hormonal perspective, but you were also suboptimal in every other category. So now we put all the deck, and that's what I do with my clients. But then I also understand the people that have come to me and they have previously used HRT or other adjunctive therapies, and they saw nothing from them. And the same thing can be said in a smaller degree about peptides. Peptides are only going to respond and benefit essentially the environment that they're being introduced to. If your life is literally a dumpster fire and you're going to throw in testosterone or whatever these peptides you want to that are most popular, these mitochondrial enhancers, you're putting it in a poor environment, and you're probably not going to see the benefits first and foremost, and secondarily, you also don't have the consistency to actually take full advantage of those things. And so really it's about aligning your nutrition, your training, your activity, your lifestyle, your stress, your sleep, all in the same direction. And then we put hormones on board, and it's the cherry on top.
Yep. Get your inputs dialed in, right? Really work on those. And like you said, everything kind of aligns with that. No, I love that breakdown. Again, I feel like I'm very similar in terms of my thought of being in the middle with that, right? It's, hey, I don't think it's bad, and I don't think it's the end all be all. We can, like you said, you can combine both of them and come to a good middle ground. But for whatever reason, that's just hard for people to do at times. But again, to go back to the testosterone and stuff like that, it really just sounds like essentially you're able to, you still are going to need to be on top of things. You're still going to need to train and stuff. But again, like something like in a deficit, like again, you have the kind of anti-catabolic effects, but you also got the anabolic effects. So you can be, earlier we talked about that spectrum on being in a deficit. The larger the deficit gets, the less muscle growth is. That kind of mitigate, like it takes that away for the most part, right? That's less of a concern. You can just train and eat enough protein, and you're probably going to be able to build some muscle in that process. Real quick, and we don't have to dive deep into this, but I'm sure you could put something like myostatin inhibitors in this and things like that too as something in the future that potentially would help with this, or not?
No. If you actually look into myostatin inhibitors, now we do have some, I don't even think they're in phase 1 trials yet, but if you look at follistatin, which was the number one, like the most touted in the bodybuilding community, myostatin inhibitor, there's a lot of conjecture about it really not doing anything. And so, yeah, if someone has a myostatin deficiency, yeah, it'll really drastically improve your recomp results. There's one, I want to say it's called bromagramab, where there's some trials on it. It's almost like a GLP-1 plus a follistatin inhibitor. There's some research. Stephen Hamesfield, which actually has a great study that we're going to cover the next time when we do female physiology. He's got a study on skeletal muscle loss and comparing men and women, looking at what are called sexual dimorphic differences. So the sex differences between males and females. But he's doing some literature or doing some work on different therapeutic modalities for increasing lean mass while decreasing body fat. Because right now, one of the biggest points of contention with the GLP-1s, whether that be semaglutide or Ozempic, or that be tirzepatide or Mounjaro. Right now we have retatrutide, which is in phase 3 trials right now. It just came out last week. They had enormous benefits. I think 70 plus pounds of weight loss from that. And the impacts on lipids were something that were close, exceeding statin and close to some of the most impactful therapeutic modalities from a dyslipidemia perspective. But one of the downsides is that for some populations and in some interventional trials, you see a precipitous loss of lean mass. So I think about Wilding and colleagues. There's a 2021 study, which really was like the precipice of getting semaglutide or Ozempic, or really Wegovy, because that's what's used for weight loss, to become approved for weight loss. And in that trial, they lost about 14.9% body fat in 6 to 8 weeks. And if you back calculate that, you think about yourself, like from a coaching perspective, I've said, man, I've lost that weight in way quicker than anyone else. But it was an extended deficit, because if you think about 6 to 8 weeks, I think it comes out to 0.25% per week. So they're losing nothing. But over the totality, they lost 15% of body weight, which is substantial. That was better than any of the weight loss drugs up until that 2020 time point. Now, if you look at the lean mass, and when they went through, I think, DEXA analysis, they found 38 to 40% of that was coming from lean mass. Now, there's some confounders there. Lean mass does not equal muscle. It's a percentage. Muscle is a percentage of lean mass. So they didn't do a muscle biopsy, or they didn't do more cross-sectional area analyses. So they couldn't get the more granular data. How much of that was skeletal muscle? Secondarily, those with excess adiposity often have inflated or artificially heightened levels of lean mass, because they've been carrying all this weight on their frame. It's almost like a resistance training stimulus throughout the day. So you see someone that's very overweight, they have massive calves, and you think, man, I've been training my whole life. I haven't been able to get calves like that. But they are essentially carrying this external load. Think about it like if you had 100 extra pounds of weight on your body, it's almost like carrying a 100-pound weight vest. So you're getting an external stimuli. And then there's some confounders within the trial, and whether lean mass loss from GLP-1s, or some of these are GLP, some of these are GLP plus GIP, which is tirzepatide, or the third, which is people call it GLP-3, which is retatrutide, is semaglutide. Essentially, it's a GLP-1, it is GIP, and then it's also a glucagon antagonist. And so with those drugs, they don't really know if this is a contention within the medical community, whether that lean mass loss is harmful, or if it's maybe they're losing some organ tissue. You could lose some of your liver from fatty liver disease, and actually you lost lean mass, but it was advantageous from your metabolic health perspective. But within that, the reason I give that summary is because there are looking at therapeutic modalities and other drugs, pharmaceuticals, and they may even cross over into what are called biologics, which is another category of medical intervention. And it's looking at how can we simultaneously increase lean mass and decrease body fat without any exercise. So it's very, very interesting. And that's where follistatin and some of those pathways would come into play. But I just don't think that there's nothing on the market that I'm aware of from a clinical perspective, or that anyone is going to use in practice without really jeopardizing their health and their long-term. Because remember, when there's growth mimetics, whether it be growth hormone or it be any of these peptides, or even we go follistatin, growth is often not solely directed towards one pathway. So the greatest example of that is growth hormone. Like, I'm not saying it causes cancer, but it could proliferate the cell growth of different cells.
The body probably has these mechanisms in place for a reason, right? And anytime you start to mess with this, you have to be careful, right? Muscle growth is a good one where, again, using testosterone, it can help you build more muscle, but you still do need to be careful with your overall health, because body, again, there's a reason why it's hard to continue to build muscle there. But real quick, myostatin is essentially, it inhibits muscle growth, right? It's something that inhibits muscle growth, and then follistatin can inhibit myostatin, right?
I believe it's an inhibitor of an inhibitor. The best way for me to contextualize that to someone that more people would be able to analogize and understand is, let's look at yohimbine. Yohimbine is an alpha-2 adrenergic receptor antagonist. It binds to the alpha receptor, and the alpha receptor is the brake on fat loss. It doesn't let free fatty acids out of a fat cell in a certain region, especially in stubborn body fat. When you utilize yohimbine, which is a common product, yohimbine hydrochloride, it binds to that alpha adrenergic receptor and essentially inhibits an inhibitor. So it's essentially like putting a brake on a brake.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. That's it's crazy. You just keep going down the pathway there. Cool, man. This was super interesting. And I love this part. And we talked, we're going to have to do part 2, which doesn't surprise me at all, but this is going to be part 2 will be good. So go ahead.
Absolutely. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in to both Jeff and myself. We will be back next month, and we will do a part 2 on body recomp. We're going to get into some of the more nuanced aspects of body recomposition, especially I want to really dive into female physiology and what I see in practice, and also I've dug into literature. And then we're also going to discuss some of the factors or the variables that we manipulate and find to be very advantageous for driving body recomposition outcomes. So, guys, if you're looking for anything from me, please feel free to reach me at DaCruz or Brandon DaCruz underscore on Instagram. My email is bdacruzfitness@gmail.com, and you guys can find me on the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. And Jeff, let them know where they can find you, my man.
Yep, Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN underscore, and then the Mind Muscle Connection, where we dive into topics like this all the time and have had Brandon on multiple times. This was fun, man. As always, looking forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. Peace, guys.
See you guys.